everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Tonight we are going to be making some homemade lasagna with some sourdough discard cheesy bread and then a cinnamon streusel like dessert with it as well. So let's start by making the base, the meat base for our lasagna. I'm using 1 yellow onion and I'm gonna give it a dice and we'll start sauteing that up in our pan over here, taking off all the outer bits because it's not very good. I'm going to turn my burner on, make sure I have the right one, and start getting some oil warmed up so that we can saute these onions up. About, I want to say 2 tablespoons because it's a big pan. Okay, we're going to cut our yellow onion in half, and then I'm going to make about 4 slices down. We're just going to do a simple dice here for it. Don't want your onion bits too big in the sauce, so just kind of a nice small dice. There we go. And then we are going to add this to our oil and let it start to saute up. Perfect. And we're going to get a nice scoop of minced garlic here. So I'm going to do a pretty hefty scoop because we've got a lot of meat that we're cooking up. So this is going to be about, I want to say 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. You could use fresh. That would be about 5 to 6 cloves minced up if you wanted to use fresh. And then I'm going to give this a nice stir to make sure the garlic and the onions all get coated in the oil. There we go. Break up some of my big chunks of onions. Okay. Now let's start making some of our ricotta base. So I have this is a 32-ounce tub of ricotta. Buy full fat. Don't get the low fat. You want the full fat ricotta. It's going to give you the best flavor. And we can just never get this little like plastic piece off. So we're going to peel off and then we're just going to pour it all the way out into our bowl here. Give it a nice squeeze out. It's kind of like the cranberry sauce at Thanksgiving. There we go. Make sure you get it all out because we're going to be mixing some pesto and some Parmesan cheese in here to give it a nice, really flavored ricotta. I like to make sure my ricotta has a good flavor so that you don't have just any like bland bases for your lasagna. So this will be, we're making the ricotta base for our lasagna. And I have some basil pesto. I love Kirkland's pesto and I love Rana's pesto. I don't know how exactly to pronounce it. Those are my 2 favorite store-bought pestos. We're going to do 2 big scoops of pesto into our ricotta. This is going to give our ricotta a lovely flavor because, you know, if you have it in there, sometimes it's just too much cheese. It goes a little bland. So I always really like to season it up. Let me give this a stir. Always one that jumps over ship. And then I'm going to add in 1 whole bag of shredded Parmesan cheese. That's about, I think there's 2 cups in a bag. And then we're going to give this a nice mix. Sometimes I'll add in chopped spinach and chopped fresh basil as well. Because it adds a nice, a little kick, and the spinach really like shrinks down when you cook it. But today we're just going to do the pesto, ricotta, and Parmesan cheese. We're going to mix it up, and you can see it kind of gives a nice kind of pale green color to it. But that's going to give it a lot of just delicious flavor in our ricotta. Okay. We've got our onions over here. They are getting nice and golden. So we're gonna pop in our Italian sausage and our ground beef, and we're gonna start sauteing it up for our sauce base. This is about 1.5 pounds of ground beef. And just start stirring it. And then I have about 1.5 pounds of Italian sausage, mild Italian sausage. And this is gonna make our like meat sauce base for our lasagna. And I'm gonna just break. I got my hamburger and my sausage in bulk at Costco, and their sausage always comes in like the casing, so I had to decase it. But I'm just gonna use my spoon now, and I'm going to break up my meat as it's starting to cook. I wanna kind of make sure my hamburger and my Italian sausage gets mixed well together. But then we're gonna add some seasonings to it, some Italian seasonings to it in just a second. It's like I always call it my shovel, but it is like a mix between a spatula and a spoon. See how it's got the spatula edge, but a spoon base? Love it, because I can stab up the meat here and break it up, but it's also really good for scooping. It was one of those, I think I got it in one of those like 10-piece sets from like Target where you can get all the utensils or whatnot. Love it. It is one of my, I think, most used utensils. I use it, I will say, more often than I use like a ladle or kitchen spoon because it has the bonus of a spatula. Okay. Scoop these around. And I just want to make sure I get all of my sausage kind of broken down. I don't want to have any super huge chunks of meat in my lasagna because you want to be able to eat it. So I'm just making sure I break it up. And now we're going to add in some spices. So I have some Italian medley. This is like the same thing as Italian seasonings. And I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons. And I'm just going to shake it over. I love Mrs. Dash's blends. They're salt-free. And so I can use a lot of them for like seasoning up things without having to worry about salt. Because I like to add garlic salt. So about 2 tablespoons of Italian seasoning. And then we're going to use a little bit of oregano. So I'm going to use, I like to add a bit more oregano because it gives you that kind of Italian kick to it. So we're going to add about a tablespoon of oregano. I'm just going to shake it around.
You have a question. Is the meat just sausage meat?
It is ground beef and sausage. So it's 1.5 pounds ground beef and 1.5 pounds Italian sausage. I like to mix it up. I think if you go all Italian sausage, it's too strong. And if you go all hamburger, I think it's too bland. I think mixing it together gives you that perfect blend. And then we're going to use a little bit of salt. So this is a lot of meat you need to season up. So you want about 2 teaspoons of salt. Because you can only salt your meat now. Once it's in there, you won't be able to salt it. Okay, we're going to cook. It's almost cooked up, which is great. Got to stir in these spices. And you want to make sure you've got good amount of spices. Don't go weak on it. Because this is what's going to give you a lot of flavor because there's a lot of cheese in lasagna and the noodles, and those don't pack a strong amount of flavor. So your sauce is where you're going to get the flavor in.
You have a question. Is it hot or sweet Italian sausage?
It is the mild Italian sausage, which I guess it's not sweet, but there's the sweet, mild, and spicy or hot Italian sausage. So this is just the mild one. If you like hot Italian sausage, that would be great. I do not like spicy foods that kick that much. I can't handle it. It's not that they aren't delicious. I'm just the biggest baby when it comes to spicy foods. So I always do mild, especially since we also have little ones. I don't know if I would like sweet Italian sausage in it. I've had it before, and I am just not a sweet on my meat type of person. Okay, we're gonna just break these up. We've got our meat almost all the way cooked through. And then we're going to add our marinara sauce. There we go. You just want to make sure all of your meat gets cooked through because it is harder to cook it once you have your sauce in. It takes longer. So I'm going to be using my favorite marinara sauce, which is Rayo's, but you could use whatever one you wanted. I'm using two 24-ounce jars for our meat sauce base for our lasagna. Woo, got it open. Let's just give it one more stir. And there we go. I'm going to pour these in. Make sure we get all of it. There we go. Look at that. I got them both open today. I always say I have like the weakest grip strength, and I'm always asking my husband to open up a jar for me. And he was like, really? And I'm always like, I just loosened it up for you. There we go. Okay, so we've got 2 jars of our marinara in. Get rid of these. We're going to give it a nice stir to coat it all. Make sure we have our sauce all mixed up. And this is going to be our meat base for our lasagna. There we go. Just want to make sure we've got all parts incorporated into our sauce. Perfect. And again, we don't have any super big chunks because you want to break it up because you want to know what's going to be, able to eat well. For my lasagna noodles, I hate boiling noodles, but in the refrigerated pasta section, they actually have lasagna sheets, and these are like the best. You never get crunchy lasagna, and you don't have to boil. And to me, that is a win-win. So they're just like fresh pasta. And
you have a question. Does your family ever have leftovers?
Yes, we do have leftovers. Like today we were at our soccer game. We had some leftover fried chicken last night. And so my oldest son stayed home and he made himself fried chicken for lunch. But yes, we typically have some leftovers. A lot of times I reuse that for my little ones' lunches, and I don't have to necessarily cook so much. Then we also give a lot of food to my parents. I cook most of their meals for them. So, it never goes to waste. Okay, we've put 2 sheets down in the base of my pan, and now I'm going to start with meat sauce. I like to start with meat sauce first because these are they're no boil sheets, but I like to make sure they get a nice bit of liquid on them from the sauce. I'm going to bring my pot close so I don't spill any, and we're going to make a nice thin layer of meat. And the beauty is if you have extra meat sauce, you can always use it for spaghetti. There. So we have a nice kind of thin layer of our meat sauce everywhere. You want to just make sure you've got your noodles all covered up, but you don't want it too heavy. And then I like to put a little sprinkling of cheese on top of that. A light one, you don't need too much. And this is our first layer of our lasagna. Now we're going to take 2 more sheets. We're going to kind of press them down a little bit. And there we go. And now we're going to do our ricotta base. So for those of you who joined us late, we've got ricotta, Parmesan cheese, and pesto mixed in this. And we're going to do a thin layer of the ricotta. Don't do it too thick. If you do it too thick, you're going to get kind of a soupy lasagna. So just a nice thin layer. You're just spread it across. And so I just do kind of a big scoop on each side, and then I'm using my spatula to spread it nice and thin. And this is our ricotta base. Perfect. And this has, again, Parmesan cheese and pesto in it to give it a nice flavor.
You got a question, what brand is the noodles?
They are Rana, I'm not sure how to say it, but they're in like the refrigerator aisle, like right where you buy all the other pasta, you know, like the refrigerator, like tortellini, ravioli. It's just like tucked in there. And I love them. As I made this when I found them once, I have not gone back to using boiled noodles or even those, like, you know how you can get those no-bake lasagna sheets in the pasta aisle? They're always a little crunchy. So here we are going to put these down. I like to make sure I push my pasta sheet into that base. It helps make it nice and even. And now we're going to do another meat sauce base. And you're going to want to use a high up dish. Whatever high up dish you have, that's what you want. If you have one of those bougie like lasagna pans that, you know, stick up really high, those are great too. But you don't want to like a 9x13. Those pans, if they're the regular ones, they're just not quite high enough. You could also do it in a Dutch oven, works well too. But you just want a nice high lip on it.
Yeah, but how many sheets are in the pack? What is it, 6?
There are 6 sheets in a pack. So I use between most of the times 2 to 3 packs, depending on how much lasagna I'm making or whatnot. There we go. So we have a nice thin layer of meat sauce. We got our mozzarella. Do a nice light sprinkling. Our last layer of cheese, when we do it on the top, will be a nice thick layer, but just a little bit in between. So you see how it's not enough to kind of blanket it, but more like a light dusting. And we'll get our next. So we can open. There we go. And I will say they fit perfectly. And I think this is a 9x13 like casserole dish with a it fits perfectly in there, like 2 sheets across. And it works really well. Sometimes I do them in a loaf pan if I'm making smaller batches to like give to like a friend of mine, and I can just cut the noodle a little bit and then I kind of use that. There we go. I'm going to push it down, and now we're going to do our ricotta base. And you just alternate between meat sauce and ricotta until you've reached the top. And again, you don't want to do a huge amount of ricotta. A nice thin layer that sandwiches between the meat layers.
What brand pesto do you use?
I like this one was Kirkland. So the 2 that I like are either Kirkland or the same brand, Rana as the noodles. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. But that one, it is, those are the 2 I like. I do not like Buitoni. I think they use a lot of pine nuts in theirs, and it just has a funky aftertaste. But these 2 I feel like have really good like taste. You could always make your own, and get them in the refrigerated aisle. Don't get it in like, you know, in the pasta aisle, they have like canned or jarred pesto. Don't use that one. That's never good. Okay, so we've got our nice thin layer of ricotta. We're going to do our next layer of noodles.
You have a question, what time do you usually go live for dinner?
You know, Sundays we typically go earlier because my parents join us, like they come over here and eat Sunday dinner with us. But during the week, we typically are a little bit later, but it's really dictated by our kids' sports schedules and what activities we have. And so it's hard to say. A lot of times during the week, we go between like around 8-ish, a little bit, you know, plus or minus 15 minutes. But again, it changes so frequently because my kids' schedules change, and you know, we just kind of work around that.
Dempsey wants to remind you he's still waiting on the.
I have it. I'm about to go shopping tomorrow, and I'm going to do the chicken cordon bleu. I saw it. I have it earmarked for this week. But it's like when I go grocery shopping, I don't necessarily go every week. I sometimes go every 2 weeks, and I buy, as you know, I buy in bulk from Costco. So you just gotta have it put in our plan. But I do have it. I already have it on the menu planned. Okay.
Yeah, Dempsey, we'll tag you. I'll even send you a copy of the video.
There we go. Okay. So here's our nice layer of our meat sauce. And then we're going to do a nice sprinkling of cheese. I like to use mozzarella, but you could also do the 6 cheese Italian if you wanted, or do a mix of mozzarella and Parmesan. There we go. Get this guy on, push him down. Perfect. And now we'll do our last layer of ricotta. And I find 1 big jar of ricotta is enough for a big lasagna like this. And again, got to use full fat ricotta. I said there's no such thing as diet cheese. Okay. There. And we're going to spread it out nice and thin. And the trick is really don't do a super thick layer of ricotta because it will make a soupy lasagna that doesn't have a good form. I find thinner layers with more noodles works out better than thick layers with less noodles. Okay. Just get this last bit spread. And see, perfectly used up that. Now, I need to open up my last sheet. Do a nice pat down, and we'll do our last layer of meat sauce. And then we'll do our noodles, and then we'll do a nice thick layer of cheese because you got to have that beautiful cheese crust on the top. So,
you got a couple more questions about the noodles if you just want to go over the brand and what they are.
Yes. So they are Rana's Lasagna, it has the E one, sheets. And they are just you don't have to boil them. They're fresh pasta sheets. And you can buy them in the pasta, like the refrigerated section where the fresh pasta is. You can get them there. I've gotten them at pretty much every grocery store I've been to, but they are a game changer because boiling and lasagna noodles is a pain. And you know how those no boil ones, they just never get soft. They get a little crunchy. These are always soft when I never have had crunchy noodles with it. Okay, I've got my nice little layer right here. And because we're about to do our cheese crust, I do not put a layer of cheese on this one because the top one will be pretty cheesy. So you don't need to have cheese and then cheese. We're going to do our last. Make sure we push it down. And put it one more down. And then what I like to do, I don't use any of the meat, but I find just a little bit of the tomato juice. And I'm going to scoop it up, and I like to kind of spread it just to make sure we get a little flavor on both sides of this noodle because the cheese kind of makes a nice little blanket. And the beauty is we'll have a little bit of this sauce left over that I can make spaghetti for my kids' lunch. Okay, so just a tiny little bit. And now we're going to do a nice heavy coating of mozzarella cheese. This is where you're making that nice cheesy blanket. And you want to make sure you kind of cover up. This is going to give you that delicious cheesy crust on the top. So we'll start with mozzarella, and then I'm going to add a little bit of shredded Parmesan as well to the top. And this is a bulk bag from Costco, but if I'm buying shredded bags, I typically use about 3 bags of mozzarella. So it's about 6 cups. There we go. But this is a lot of lasagna. So we've got my nice thick layer of mozzarella there. And now we're going to do a little bit more Parmesan on the top. Just tuck that noodle down.
How many packages of the noodles do you end up using?
I use almost all 3 of them. I have 2, technically I have 2 noodle sheets left in my 3rd package. But for a big lasagna like this, I used all 3 packages because there's 6 in one. Now, if you're making like a smaller, like a loaf pan size, 1 sometimes works because there's 6 sheets in it, and that works well for a loaf size for smaller. So we sprinkle this on top. We don't need all of it. Now, let's go pop this in the oven and we can work on the rest of dinner. But look at this beautiful, it's like a 10-pound lasagna here. It's pretty heavy. I have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. Slide it down here on the bottom because we're going to cook something on top of it. And we're going to let it cook. It needs just about 30 minutes to cook, or you can make it go slower at 350 in about 45. Just depends. You can make it fit your time. Lasagna is pretty forgiving because really everything in it is essentially cooked. You just want all that cheese to melt. Okay, let's clean up our workspace a little bit. If you're not about waste, the lasagna noodles that you have left over, you can cut them up and they're great for chicken noodle soup. So I always find ways to reuse things so I'm not throwing anything away. Okay, let's get this area cleaned up a little bit since we're kind of messy with the lasagna. And then we're going to work on our sourdough cheese bread. Just clean up my stove here. Kind of messy. I always say I'm not the cleanest of cooks, but it all gets cleaned up at the end of the day. I know there's people that are like, clean up as you go or be more cognizant. And to me, cooking is like an art and you can't mess with the artist in the process. Okay, so I made some sourdough discard kind of pizza crust essentially, but we're going to use it to make some yummy cheese bread and then kind of a dessert thing with it. This is the base of this was 400 grams of discard, which is awesome to get rid of a lot of discard if you need to, and 500 grams of bread flour and a little bit of salt and like 300 grams of water. So it is a starter heavy base, like dough, but it is nice because I had a good sizable amount of discard that I needed to get ready. I'm taking a little bit of olive oil in here and I'm running it around because I want my kind of pizza dough to kind of crisp up nicely in here. And we're going to make a nice cheesy garlic dough or cheese bread kind of with it. Let me slide this a little bit out of the way. And we're going to use about half of this, but it is a little bit sticky. So I'm going to just make sure I dust a little bit down here. And I'm just going to try to cut it in half, and we'll use the other half in a little bit. There we go. Perfect. So this isn't like a fully proofed bread like what is it like when you're making actually sourdough bread. This is just like a pizza crust. So you could stretch it out and do a large pizza if you wanted to, but we're going to use it to make our delicious kind of cheese bread. There we go. And I'm doing it in a little pan just to make it kind of like a deep dish, a little bit thicker. And then kind of like blot it like almost like a focaccia. There we go. And let me wash my hands real quick. There we go. And the nice thing about this is it takes about 5 to 6 hours from start. So I made it right before we went out for our soccer game, and it doesn't require much work. After that, you just do your stretch and folds, and then you just let it sit. I had it proofing in my oven here. I guess I turn that off at 95 degrees. Now I have about a stick of butter in here. I'm not using it all on here, but I'm going to use a little bit of it to spread on our dough.
You have a question? Do you have a cookbook?
I do not have a cookbook. I do post all of our videos on like the link in our page so people can reference it. And then I do post some recipe cards. I'm pretty new to this. I just started at the beginning of the year. And so I've had lots of, comments about getting a cookbook. So
clarify, you've been cooking for 25
yes,
years.
I've been cooking for 25 years. I just started streaming at the beginning of the year, like right after we got back from our cruise over winter break. So I just kind of did it on a whim, and I've been really enjoying it, and I've been having a lot of fun. Okay, so I've got my butter. I'm just brushing it over the top of our crust to give it a nice kind of buttery crunch there. We're going to use a little bit of garlic salt to give it that nice kind of garlicky flavor and a saltiness, so we don't have to use regular salt. I'm going to sprinkle it over, and then we're going to use a little bit of minced garlic. You don't need much here because minced garlic can be really overpowering when you're putting it on a garlic bread. So I caution people, don't put too much. You don't need a lot. So I'm going to use just about half a teaspoon for this whole thing. And we're just going to kind of smear it around so that you don't have it all one thing. And this is going to give you just a really lovely kind of garlic flavor. There we go. Just kind of scooping it up so I don't have it everywhere. But it gives you a bit more than garlic salt can give you. And then we're going to do a little bit of mozzarella cheese on the top. There we go. And a little bit of Parmesan cheese. Now we don't want it's not a pizza, so we don't want a super lot of cheese, but enough to give it a lovely kind of, garlic bread, cheesy taste to it. There we go. And we are going to sprinkle some oregano on the top. I love oregano, and it will give it a lovely kind of flavor. So pop this in. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so this is our sourdough discard kind of pizza crust dough that we made, that we put some garlic, butter, oregano, and different cheeses on it to make our garlic bread with dinner tonight. Okay, I'm gonna pop this guy in the oven, let it start cooking, and then we're gonna make our dessert one, and then we're gonna make a little bit of a kind of a bruschetta, like chopped up tomatoes and onions and fresh basil for our to go on top of it after, a nice little fresh pop. Okay, now we're gonna use the rest of our dough. We're gonna make our dessert one. Let me grab my cinnamon and my butter. And it's pretty sticky, I will tell you that. So the best way to work with it is just get a little bit of flour, spread it out, because we're going to stretch it on there. And then I'm going to get a little bit on my hands and coat it. And we're just going to pull it off.
You have a question? Do you have a big family?
I do. I have 5 kids and then my husband. So that is a pretty good family. And then I actually came from a really large family. I have 9 older siblings. So I say like 5 is big for a lot of people, but for me, it's like half the size of the family I had growing up. Okay, we're going to kind of stretch it out. I've got that. Nice. We're going to use a little bit of olive oil in our cake pan. And you could also do this on like a big baking sheet if you wanted to. But I like this. It's going to keep it a nice kind of dense. There. Kind of let the oil move all the way around. And then we've got our lovely pizza kind of crust. And we're going to mix it around, kind of dimple it like you would with like a focaccia. And we're going to start by spreading a little bit of butter, melted butter on it. And we're going to do a mix. We're going to have our start with like a cinnamon sugar base, and then we're going to make a little bit of a streusel to top it.
You have a question? No fruit tonight?
We'll have some strawberry. We'll have strawberries with our dinner tonight. We'll probably cut them up in a little bit, but yes, we do have fruit every single night. I said I bought pineapples, but they only had really green ones at the store, so those are going to have to sit for a little bit. We're going to sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon over our base, give it a nice little dusting, and then make sure I'm getting it all on the edges. Perfect. Where's my sugar? And then a light sprinkle of sugar. I'll say a little sugar goes a long way on this because the bread isn't super thick. And now we're going to make a little streusel to put on top of it. So that was about, I want to say like not even 1/4 of a cup, like 1/8 of a cup of sugar. But beautiful. Now we're going to make a simple streusel. So I have the remainder of my butter, which is probably 1/2 stick now. I'm going to mix in a little bit of cinnamon, about a teaspoon. And then we're going to put in a little bit of sugar. I'm thinking around 1/4 of a cup. And I'm going to stir it up with my spoon. And then we're going to add a little bit of flour to make a nice little streusel crumble to go on top. So first we want to kind of make this cinnamony sugar base, kind of like what you would see on a coffee cake. There we go. So it's kind of pasty. Now we're going to add in some flour. We don't need much. We'll start off. You don't want it too floury. So that's about, I want to say maybe 1/3 of a cup, maybe 1/4 of a cup. And this is where I like to do it with my fingers to kind of mix it to make sure the nice crumb forms. There we go. See how it's getting together nice and crumbly. Might add a pinch more flour. Doesn't need much more. There we go. And essentially you just want this lovely kind of crumb topping to go on top of our delicious like cinnamon sugar dessert pizza bread. And again, we used our sourdough discard to make it. It was a sourdough discard heavy recipe, which I love. Sometimes you have a lot of discard that you need to get rid of, and a lot of recipes only use like 1/2 cup of discard. This one used 400 grams, which is like almost 2 cups. Okay, and now we're just going to sprinkle this all around the top of our thing, and we're going to go pop this in the oven. We can always peek on the other things while we're there. Okay. Got it nice everywhere. This is going to be kind of for our dessert, which looks delicious. Anything with streusel on it to me is like a win. Okay, we've got you can see our lasagna in there cooking up nicely. Now what I like to do now, since we have just a little bit left, I had been cooking it at 400. We're going to turn it up to 500. Let me cancel that. Otherwise, I'll be pushing that up button forever. So we're going to cook it at 450, not 500, but 450. That extra 50 degrees will have the cheese bubble up, but it will also work great with the pizza crust. Okay, I'm going to give my hands a quick wash, and then we're going to make our bruschetta base, which is going to go with our cheesy bread. So you can scoop on the tomatoes and the fresh basil and onions on it. But let's clean up a little bit of this mess right here because I don't want flour to get into our things. Let's just wipe this off. Okay. Got a nice clean bowl over here. And there's just some mozzarella cheese. That won't make a big difference. We're going to start with a red onion. You want to use red onion over a yellow or a white onion. They're a bit milder. They're better eaten raw. I'm going to cut it in half. And we're going to kind of do a really small kind of slice on it, like a mince. So I'm doing several kind of slits across because I want a nice small cut on it. Because when you're eating it with the tomatoes, you don't want a huge piece of onion. You want the nice flavor of the onion, but not overpowering. There we go. And perfect. And get any of these longer pieces. And now I'm going to go over it again. We're just going to keep kind of mincing it up nice and small. Perfect. Because you just don't want to have any big chunks. And again, you want to use a red onion for this. Red onions are the best onions eaten raw. I guess if you also have a shallot would work well with this too, because that is a nice kind of sweeter onion. Okay, we're going to add this into our bowl. Perfect. And this is going to be for our bruschetta base, which we're going to put on top of our cheesy bread, which will be the side dish to, of course, our delicious lasagna that we have cooking in the oven right now. And then we also made a delicious kind of dessert thing. So I'm just using, that was 1/4 of a red onion, but you see when you mince it up, it makes quite a lot. So we'll save another one for the next day. And now I have a bunch of cherry tomatoes that we are going to quarter and put in there. You could also use, what is it? Like a plum tomato or Roma tomato. Those would all work well. I would stick away from like I want to say they're like the beefy tomato ones. You want a nice rich tomato. You don't want one that's going to be mealy. So ones that you use for like slicing on sandwiches aren't as good. You want a tomato that has a lovely flavor. So we're just going to kind of chop these up into smaller pieces. I tend to love the cherry or the grape tomatoes for this because they do have a lot of flavor in them. And an heirloom tomato would also work really great too, although it's not really tomato season right now. So in the summer though, this is good. We're going to slice these up. I'm going to put my first batch in with my onions. That way I have a little bit more room. And then we're going to use a little bit of fresh basil, and we'll mince that up to add in here as well. And then we're going to put a little bit of balsamic reduction on it, which is essentially balsamic vinegar that has been cooked over low heat until it has reduced into like a syrup. And it's sweeter than vinegar, like a straight up balsamic vinegar, but it has a tangy sweetness to it. Okay. And there we go. And you just want to make sure none of your tomatoes are super huge. You want nice little bite-sized pieces. Now, we're not doing this like a true bruschetta being on like a crispy bread, but we're going to serve it with our cheesy sourdough discard bread that we made, which will be lovely. And this will add a little brightness to it. There we go. I'm going to give it a good stir because I like to see what my ratio to onions and tomatoes are. I never want to have too many onions in it. So I'm going to give it a stir and see how that is looking. See if we need any more tomatoes. Maybe a few more tomatoes. Probably, there we go. And that should be enough for it. And then we're going to get some fresh basil from my poor little window plants that are begging to be replanted into the garden. I'm hoping winter has finally decided to leave us and that we will have just warm weather from now. I almost last week during my kids' spring break, I was cleaning out the garden beds and getting ready for, planting, and I was almost tempted to begin. And I'm so glad I didn't, because then we had a surprise frost and everything would have been ruined. Especially if you're into gardening, you realize unless you germinate your own seeds and everything, it's still expensive. It's expensive to get all the plants in the soil. Okay. Hey, Bruni, Loki. No barks. Okay, let's get our fresh basil. I've got two sad window plants over here that have been well picked over, but we're going to mince them up and add them into our bruschetta. base. I know, as I said, they don't thrive well when they're not in a good environment. You know, luckily my window box does get a good amount of sun there. There. And you want a good, you know, I always say with fresh basil, the more the better because it's delicious. So I want to get at least kind of a fourth of a cup. So we're going to just pick these guys. There we go. See if there's any other big ones. Perfect. We'll move our sad guys back over here. And we're going to mince them up. So I'm just going to go over, use my hand push down here, and I'm going to kind of rock this one back and forth. This is going to give me a nice firm cut down on the herbs that will allow it to mince up nicely. And perfect. And now we're going to add this. Oh, there's a couple more. We're going to add this to our tomatoes. And we're going to give this a nice stir. You see how the nice green have popped in there with the red onions and our cherry tomatoes. And let's see where. Oh, here's my balsamic glaze. And I like to season it with a little bit of garlic salt. So you don't need much. Give it a stir. And then again, light drizzle. This is balsamic glaze or balsamic reduction. And you just want to do a light drizzle across like that. And there we have our delicious bruschetta. Okay, let's go check on our lasagna and our bread, see if it's done. Hopefully it's done. Otherwise, we'll have to cut up our strawberries. Oh, beautiful. Okay. Look at that guy, nice and beautiful and ready. We're just going to make lots of trips back and forth since I don't want to drop anything. And get this guy. He's very heavy. And look at our delicious homemade lasagna. Perfect. I'm just touching, making sure it is done. I'm going to pop out a cutting board so we can cut off a piece of that, and I'll serve up. We're going to let the dessert we put in like a little bit later. So when I cut this up, we can grab the dessert out and see how it looks. Okay, let me get a plate. And this is a little bit hot, so I don't want to burn myself. Beautiful. Let me get my knife here. And beautiful, lovely crust on this. And then what I like to do, we'll kind of cut it across. You can just see the nice bubble and pop made of our sourdough. And that was there. And then I'm going to serve it with a nice serving of our bruschetta, like tomatoes and stuff on top. It's going to be so bright and lovely. Now, time for our lasagna. We've got it. Let me get a knife. There we go. I said you got to cut through this nice cheesy layer. And then I'm going to use my little shovel spoon to cut out our first piece. There we go. And I always say I'm terrible at getting out the lasagna, but see if we've got it. Beautiful. Look at this lovely cheese pull. How delicious is that? our gorgeous homemade lasagna using the nice fresh lasagna noodles, served with our sourdough discard pizza crust that we bougied up with some cheese and some fresh bruschetta. And now I'm going to grab our dessert out of the oven and show you guys what that is. And look at our beautiful, delicious. We used our same crust that we used on our cheesy sourdough crust over here, but instead we dressed it up with some butter and cinnamon and made a homemade streusel. Well, guys, we are done cooking. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking streams every single day, showing you what I'm cooking for my family. Also walk you through it so you guys can make amazing food at home too. Thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.